So let's study pollination. So what is pollination? Pollination is transfer of pollen from anther to stigma. Anther, the male reproductive part, and the stigma or the part of the pistil where the anther is going, pollen is going to land. So the transfer is called the pollination. So let's study what are the types of pollination. Two types of pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is also called the autogamy. Transfer of anther from the same flower or genetically similar flower is called the autogamy. Genetically similar flowers, for example, if the plants are growing in a field, the transfer of pollen from that field to the stigma is also self-pollination. Okay, so we'll study what kind of self-pollination is that. Self-pollination can be in a cleistogamous flower which do not open. The flowers which do not open are called the cleistogamous flowers. So the pollen is inside the and stigma is inside, so the flowers do not open. So this kind of self-pollination is the option. There is no other option. So this kind of self-pollination is called the cleistogamy. Okay, the example is viola, oxalis and commelina. Similarly, the flowers, if they mature, homogamy, the flower at maturity, stigma and anther mature at the same time, then in this case the pollination is again self-pollination. For example, in Vinca rosea, argemone, Melovilus jalapa, potato, etc., this is homogamy. Bud pollination, sometimes the pollination occurs at the bud stage only. So if the pollination is at the bud stage, this is called the bud pollination. This is also kind of self-pollination. Now there is a kind of self-pollination which is called geitonogamy. Geitonogamy, many times 1 mark question is asked in the examination. It is a type of pollination where the pollen is from anther of a different flower of the same plant. Means, for example, I have told you, if in a field where plants are growing, the anther is pollen is coming from some other plant, then it is called geitonogamy. It is also a kind of self-pollination or autogamy. Okay, so this is geitonogamy. Now, second type is cross-poll. Before we study cross-pollination, what are the advantages of self-pollination? First advantage is the characteristics of the plant are preserved. Means if self-pollinated, there is no mixing, so those plants characteristics will be preserved. Pollination chances are more since the same flower, same field, same area, so chance of pollination is more. Then pollen are not to be produced in large number, means plant requires less pollens because it is ensured from the same plant or in the from the nearby plant. Then flowers, they need not be showy, means since pollination chances are very high, so plants need not to be very brightly colored and showy and all. Fragrance and nectars, etc., are also not needed uh, in most of the cases. Whereas the disadvantage is, if the plant is pollinating generation after self-pollinating generation after generation, there will be inbreeding depression. Means there will be some characteristics which will be these will be repeated and there will be loss of some characteristics. This is called inbreeding depression. We'll study later. Then new characteristics are not introduced, defective characteristics may not be eliminated, or new varieties cannot be produced by these methods. So cross pollination or nowadays hybridization is being done to prevent this inbreeding depression. So transfer of pollen from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of a different plant is called the cross pollination. Okay, so cross pollination is also nowadays is hybridization, cross hybridization. So cross pollination advantages are, mm, before I we study the, please subscribe and share video. सब्सक्राइब बटन अभी दबा दीजिए ताकि और भी स्टूडेंट्स और आपको सारी वीडियोस एक साथ मिल जाएंगी एक सब्सक्राइब बटन दबाने से, और दूसरे स्टूडेंट्स के साथ भी शेयर करिए क्लास 12th के, ताकि उनको भी ये रेडीमेड मटेरियल फ्री में मिल जाए। तो मैंने बहुत सारी वीडियोस डाल दी, 25-26 वीडियोस डाल दिए हैं ऑलरेडी। तो वो सभी वीडियोस आपको एक साथ सब्सक्राइब करने से एक जगह पे मिल जाएंगी। ओके, लेट्स कंटिन्यू the agencies of pollination. The different agencies we'll discuss one by one. First is wind. You know, wind. It is also called, wind pollination is called anemophily. Anemophily pollinated flowers कैसे होने चाहिए? Since they are going to be released in the air, so the pollen should be light and the stigma is very hairy to receive those pollens. So pollens are very large in numbers. The flowers can be colorless, can be odorless, or can be nectarless, because the pollen needs to be carried by the wind. Pollens are produced in large numbers, small, light, dry, can have wings sometimes. Pollens are non-sticky. Stigma is large and hairy. Here you can see sugarcane. You must have seen the maize, the hairy stigma comes out. So these are the characteristics of wind pollinated. Most of the crops, wheat, maize, rice, you must have seen the flowers are means brownish in color. They are not colored, very beautifully colored. So there is no need, since the wind pollination is there. Whereas in insect pollinated flowers, before we study insect pollinated flowers, here you will see the hydrophily, means the pollination by water. So water pollination example is a very good example is Vallisneria. Sometimes the pollen is in the form of a ribbon, so that it is caught by the uh, stigma. And here you can see the female flowers are floating on the surface of the water, and the male flowers are also they are coming on the surface, and then there is uh, fertilization at the surface of the water. So Vallisneria, the male and female flowers are floating on the surface of water. Here you can see here. So this is pollination in Vallisneria. Next is entomophily. You must have heard flowers, uh, friends, the honeybee and the butterflies. So these are the butterflies. So entomophily, entomology is the study of insects. So entomophily is the pollination by insects. So brassica means sarson, ficus, bud, calotropis, rose, acta भी कहते हैं कई इसको, bougainvillea. These are the examples where the insects pollinate the flowers. Now you can see the characteristics of the flowers. They are colored. The corolla is very brightly colored to attract the insects. Here you can see corolla is red colored, yellow colored, purple colored. So corolla is very brightly colored. Then must have nectar. Nectaries in flowers may must have, because insects are visiting them for these nectar only. So nectar is very means there will be they are brightly colored, and there will be beautiful smell also. They will produce uh, fragrance to attract these insects. So these are the characteristics of flower pollinated by insects. Next is A very important example of flower pollinated by insects is salvia. Here you can see a lever mechanism. Lever mechanism means you can see the insect proboscis entering here to the nectaries, and here the uh, pollen will be deposited on the wings of this insect, and this pollen when will visit the another flower, it will carry the pollen from here. So this is a kind of lever mechanism. Here the proboscis is here inserted, and the lever of this anther will attach to the body of the insect. So very important, very beautiful example of insect pollinated flowers. Another example is here you can see the fig. Here the insect lays eggs inside this. So when the insect lays eggs inside the fruit, the flower is closed flower, so there is no outer source for going inside. So the insect goes inside and lays eggs. When the eggs they hatch, the male wasp is going to develop, and this male wasp the male wasp will be digging hole in this tunnels बना देगा. But this male is not going to come out. It will uh, produce the tunnel for the female to come out. The female when comes out carries the pollen or the male gamete of the flower, and then it visits the next. So very important example, very beautiful example to show you insect pollination. Plants and insects have evolved together. Some flowers they resemble the insects. Here you can see the pollination by bat. Bat, the group is called Chirotera. Chiroterophily is the pollination by bats. Chirotera is the group of bats. So the flowers they should be very large, colorful, because these bats are also visiting these flowers for nectar, and the flower must have large corolla so that bats are easily they can come to the and insert their beaks in this corolla. Nectaries honi chahiye, beautiful fragrance, and since they are coming at night, तो उनको खुशबू से ही वो पहुंच जाएंगे वहां पे. तो एग्जाम्पल इज कीगेला सॉसेज ट्री, then Bohemia, then Kadam tree. Kadam आपने देखा होगा in those areas where this plant is there, must have seen bats visiting them. Next is ornithophily. Ornithology. Ornithology is the study of birds. So ornithophily is the pollination by birds. So birds again, since the birds had to insert their beaks for the nectar, the flower is very large corolla, beautiful corolla. The attraction is there. There are nectaries for the birds. So this is the characteristics of pollination by birds. Bottle brush is the example. Then agave, bignonia, bombex. These are the examples of pollination by bats. So what are the advantages of cross pollination? I deliberately brought it here before the types of pollination, because the topic in your book is outbreeding. So before outbreeding devices, so before that you must know what are the advantages of cross pollination. New varieties are produced, the offsprings are healthier, the harmful characteristics are eliminated, the offsprings are more adapted to the environment. Cross pollination ensures that the pollen is from a different variety or different plant. So if the pollen is from a different plant, there will be new characteristics. The new characteristic, they will be resistant to diseases. Better varieties will be produced. Example we have given of onion. Whereas disadvantages, because since cross pollination requires pollen from a different plant, it may sometimes not certain. Sometimes pollination may not occur. very good characteristics may be lost. Okay, and bad characteristics may be introduced because तुक्का है ये. Okay, so sometimes it happens. So the nature has done it to prevent self pollination, because we have learned the disadvantages of self pollination. So since self pollination has so many disadvantages, so nature has some outbreeding devices to prevent inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression we have discussed already, that if continuous self pollination occurs, then there will be some characteristics uh, which will be lost, or which will disappear. So depression will be there. So plants have some devices for that. So for first device is pollen and stigma may not be recepted at the same time. पॉलन अलग टाइम पे मेच्योर हो रहा है, स्टिग्मा अलग टाइम पे मेच्योर हो रहा है, तो दोनों रिसेप्टिव ही नहीं होंगे, तो पॉलिनेशन के चांसेस आर वेरी लेस, तो सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन नहीं होगा. एंथर और स्टिग्मा की पोजीशन में वेरी. एंथर स्टिग्मा ऊपर है तो एंथर नीचे है, सो ये सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन के चांसेस आर लेस, सो दूसरे प्लांट से होगा. Self incompatibility means pollen of that particular plant is not matching with the chemistry of the stigma and pollen की chemistry ही match नहीं करती है, so self incompatible होते हैं. And unisexual flowers, तुम्हें मालूम है, some plants like papaya, the male and female plants are different. So if bisexual flowers है, तो there will be no chances of self fertilization तो है ही नहीं. So self unisexual flowers में this is the advantage, that there will be pollination from a different flower. So this is all about the pollination and outbreeding devices. So next we will discuss pollen pistil interaction of fertilization and double fertilization. So please share my video with the students of class 12th, and if you are preparing for NEET, then also these videos will be very helpful for you. Thank you very much.